Wendy, I really appreciate that. And I'm just really excited to be here, y'all. Like Wendy said, my name is Amber Masters. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am a proud graduate of Lead North, which Wendy shared earlier is now Thrive. So it's just an honor to be here with you, Wendy, and just speaking to like Leadership Nation or Leadership Tulsa Nation today. So thanks for having me. Just a little bit about my background. I grew up in a small town in Western Oklahoma, Clinton, Oklahoma. I went to OSU and I joined Teach for America after that, where I taught middle school science for a couple of years in Phoenix, Arizona. And I earned my master's degree at Arizona State University. In 2009, whenever Greater Tulsa opened as a Teach for America region, I got the opportunity to move a little bit closer to home and help start this region. And I've made Teach for America and Tulsa my home ever since. And I've just gotten a chance to grow professionally as our region has matured over the past 12 years. I've had the pleasure of coaching core members directly, leading some key initiatives like our institute or our summer training. And I currently work, as Wendy said, as our senior managing director. I get to lead a team of the most fantastic people to coach our first and second year teachers. I prepared a presentation today to answer 3 questions. What is Teach for America? What has progress looked like in Tulsa over the past decade? And what has it been like to navigate this past year? And before I kind of jump into that, I would really love to hear if there are other questions or insights or wonderings or hopes that you had when you joined the call. If you feel comfortable coming off mute, I'd love to hear you in that way. If you'd rather put it into the chat, feel free to do that. And I just kind of want to take stock in what people's interests are before I get started.
Well, this is Teresa Burkett, and I've been a supporter of Teach for America for years, and just appreciate the way you encourage students and get them excited about education. We had a mentoring program at Hamilton Middle School when it was a middle school, and those students need the adult support so much, and you all provide it.
Thanks, Teresa. I really appreciate that.
Good morning, Amber. Karen Kiley, good to see you.
Hi, Karen.
I do have one question. Maybe you'll get to in your presentation. There was a recent announcement by the State Department of Ed of Teach for America working to help improve teacher prep and leadership training across the state. If I understood it correctly, I was hoping you could touch on that a bit, that recent announcement.
Got it. That's super helpful. Thanks, Karen. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If you think of something, let's add it into the chat. Wendy's going to watch the chat and kind of help me if I need to clarify something, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Oprah style, I'm told. So I hope that means I either get a car or I become unexpectedly emotional or something like that. I'm really here for that, Wendy, and excited about that portion.
I'm ready, maybe.
Okay, so let's start with what is Teach for America. And it sounds like people have some background knowledge on the call, but in case this is your first introduction to Teach for America, I'll kind of start with big picture. At the heart of our work, we are a leadership development organization. And our mission is to find, develop, and support a diverse network of leaders who expand opportunity for children. And of course, that mission is in service to our vision. One day, all children in this nation will have an opportunity to attain an excellent education. And we do this, we make progress towards our vision by finding or recruiting promising leaders who commit to teach for 2 years in a low-income community. We call our teachers core members. And during their 2-year commitment in the classroom, our core members have an immediate impact on students and schools That's that second bubble there, an immediate impact. And they do this all while developing into systems change leaders through our coaching and professional development. The systems change leadership is really critical to our ability to reach our vision. So we know that potential is equally distributed across all students, but right now, opportunity is not. And we need leaders at every layer in the system. We need teachers, school leaders, policymakers to change the system so that children do have that opportunity to be successful. And we believe our alumni, kind of that fourth bubble there, are going to play a critical role in driving systems change. So we're focused on fostering their collective leadership together. And we have nearly 60,000 alumni across the country. So we're building a pretty critical mass of folks to collaborate with. Let's talk a little bit about that systems change. So the problem that we seek to address, educational inequity, is a systemic problem. As it says on the slide, our public education system has remained largely unchanged for 100 years, and it is not designed to give all students the agency to overcome the barriers that we currently see in our world, let alone the problems that we know the next generation will have to address. So we aspire for our alumni, those people who used to be core members, experiencing success teaching in a low-income classroom, to think strategically about adjusting that system and working alongside with other committed systems, other committed citizens, folks like us on this call, to work together so that one day opportunity is also equally distributed. And we no longer see where a zip code determines the academic outcomes of students. And of course, we all know academic outcomes often determine life outcomes as well. So we know that if we can solve the educational inequity, it will unlock all kinds of other opportunities for our community. Most of us on this call have been a part of the public school system, so it may be hard for us to always see the systemic challenges at play. I mean, we hear them academically, but it's hard to see them in action. So I like to use this metaphor to help me make sense of it. So has anyone ever heard of the, boiling a frog in water story? Okay, again, I grew up in rural Oklahoma, so frog legs are considered a delicacy. So this metaphor is most likely an urban legend, but it really resonates with me. So the story goes that if you put a frog in a pot of water and you slowly turn up the heat, the frog will stay in the pot. But if you boil the water first and try to put the frog in it, the frog will jump out. Again, this is a metaphor. I'm a terrible cook. I don't really think this is how you get frog legs, but let's put my lack of culinary knowledge aside. And we'll just consider how this could be a metaphor for our educational system in the United States. So what things in the water did you not notice because you entered the system at a tender age? I entered, the education system in kindergarten at age 5. And at age 5, I trusted most things like the education system. And I picked up on the game of school and I tried to play it really well. And I was not aware of the things that were inside the pot that were unhealthy for me and unhealthy for other children, and really unhealthy for our society as a whole. I can share a little bit more. Again, I grew up in Clinton, Oklahoma, home of the Red Tornadoes, if you follow sports. And I didn't know this as a child, but I grew up in a low-income community and a low-income family. And my school experienced some of the same challenges that I see in schools in Tulsa today. And although my family and community had challenges, I also experienced many privileges and educational advantages. I was tracked as a child, so I was placed in gifted and talented classes by 2nd grade, and I engaged in honors and pre-AP courses and AP courses. And my teachers held really high expectations for me academically relative to my peers. And I attribute that to making a big difference in my life. In fact, my siblings and I all went to college, and that was a first in our family. And I am really proud of my accomplishments, but I've also experienced a lot of confusion and guilt because of my educational experience. So only about 10% of my graduating class went to a 4-year college. And I thought that was sort of normal, like a bell curve, if you will. And I know now that that's not true for high income communities. And also, although my hometown is very diverse, my peers in those tracked classes, the classes that better prepared me for college, all looked like me. They were all white. The people of color I grew up with did not get the same opportunity that I did. And I have seen this scenario of the opportunity gap play out across many communities and at many scales. And it honestly just like makes my stomach turn. It makes me really like grieve for the opportunities lost for my friends back at home and the individual students that I meet here in Tulsa. And grief is not the right word for the way I feel about, like, when you think about it at schools, you know, entire communities, cities, and states. It feels more like anguish when I think about like entire generations of brilliance that we may have missed. And I'm really fueled to stop this pattern. But just because I'm fueled to make this change doesn't mean that I just like work hard and then it happened. Working within a broken system, again, to address those systemic challenges, the challenges that we don't even see sometimes in the water, doesn't follow that story arc that we see in movies. So my experiences have been more like that old saying, you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. For example, gaining access to those honors classes so deeply impacted me and my siblings. When I was a teacher, that became my goal for all of my students. So I preached to students and families alike, like, hey, these are these door opener classes. We've got to get everyone into, you know, AP, algebra, like this is the pathway to college. We've got to do it. And this is not necessarily wrong, but I really lacked the understanding of how my perspective was limited. I was perpetuating a myth that there are only a few slots, and I was preferencing my students to get those slots. And I didn't stop and ask myself questions like, why do we even have door opening classes? And who designed this like door opening class? And who does it preference? And why aren't there enough seats for every student to gain access to that if that's what we think will make them college ready? So I'm still learning and growing, and I've been at this work for 14 years. And while I'm eager to make changes, I'm also more keenly aware that being a part of this inequitable system has actually worked my judgment too, which can be disheartening and disorienting. And you know, you may be thinking of some of the things in your own educational career too that you're rethinking, and that's okay. And looking at the slide and seeing all the systems challenges might actually start to feel overwhelming. So for example, when I look at this slide, I see things like inadequate teacher support and development under schools, or tracking, like I shared from my personal educational story. Under school systems, I see inequitable distribution of resources. I see racism and implicit bias. I see a broken criminal justice system. I see all of these issues that, you know, visually are kind of weighing down on the student in the picture, weighing down on the teacher leading the classroom, weighing down on the school structure. And it can start to feel a little overwhelming, honestly. But in those moments, I like remind myself that these systems were built by people. So I know that they can be rebuilt by people like us on this call, so that, you know, they're more equitable, so that all children can attain an equitable education. In fact, I want to look at some of the progress that we've made in Tulsa over the past decade or so. Let me click on over. So anywhere we see progress, we see effective leadership. And I want to share 3 categories of leaders we have cultivated over the past 12 years: teachers, school leaders, and educational nonprofit leaders. So in classrooms, we have more than 200 teachers going beyond traditional teaching expectation to support students to thrive academically. 3 of the past 6 Tulsa Public School District Teacher of the Year winners have been Teach for America alumni. And the picture of Rob Kaiser at the top is the teacher who won in 2016. And Rob is now leading in another capacity as a school leader at Monroe. And school leaders like Rob have been making a significant impact in Tulsa. For example, Elsie Huerta Pollock, who is the second person pictured here, is the founder of Tulsa Honor Academy. And she and her team have really redefined a pathway for students to excel in Tulsa. Her first school, Tulsa Honor Academy Middle School, earned an A in the most recent state report card. Not many middle schools did that. THA is considered the top middle school in the Tulsa metro area and is in the top 3% of schools statewide. And she recently opened her third school this fall. And Elsie represents just one of 16 TFA principals or system leaders that we have in Tulsa. So we've talked about classroom leadership, school and systems leadership, and we also see our alumni positively impacting educational nonprofits in Tulsa. BEST, Impact Tulsa, Met Cares, Tulsa Changemakers, Reading Partners, and the Tulsa Debate League are all led by TFA alumni. Carlisha Williams Bradley, who is pictured here, is the leader of Impact Tulsa and serves on the State Board of Education, where she advocates for students and systems change across the state. And I am sure everyone on this call can recall a positive change in Tulsa education as a result of one of these educational nonprofits. We have seen local debaters go to nationals, thousands of volunteers get invested in early literacy, and student-led change projects coming to fruition, just to name a few.
Hey, Amber, I would love to add a fourth category because there are core members who have stayed in Tulsa that haven't necessarily stayed in the education space that are also making a tremendous impact. I know for a fact in our nonprofit community, but in other kinds of endeavors as well. So I didn't even add, your focus is really on education, but there is actually a fourth category of these people who are change leaders going out and impacting in other places too.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a good spot for us to give a shout out to Marcia Bruno Todd, who leads here at Leadership Tulsa, who leads the Thrive program. And, you know, we all have been on this call positively impacted by the adult leadership development that Wendy and her team, Jake, Andrew, and Marcia are all TFA alumni. So I just really appreciate that and appreciate the opportunity to get to shout them out as well, because we're really proud of the work that they're doing. Y'all, I have a smile on my face as I'm thinking about these incredible people. They have inspired me, they've challenged me, and they've contributed in profound ways. And I don't want the smile, you know, to fade from my face too quickly, but I also want to be honest about the truth of what we're facing. So we have profound inequity in our country, which causes pain and suffering for millions. It stifles dreams and potential across generations. And in this current context, we are just not living up to the most essential promise that we make to our children. And that promise is that regardless of race or income or social identity, that all kids will have the opportunity to learn, lead, and thrive. And unfortunately, we all know this. Where a child is born right now determines the educational and life outcomes as a result of an outdated and unequal education system. And all of this was true before the onset of the pandemic. And I know that you have all experienced the past 18 months, so I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but it's been really challenging. I know for me personally, this past year has meant me and my family experiencing loss, uncertainty, fear, and just the constant need to change and adjust to meet the changing expectations at our jobs, cover childcare needs, and try to do homeschooling at the same time. And I'm in education and I found it challenging. So I know that it's been hard. And while it has been challenging for me, and surely all of you on the call too, our core members and alumni have seen firsthand just how this crisis has disproportionately affected students of color and students in low-income communities. So we know very well that the health outcomes and access in the city are inequitable, and the challenges in the education system have just increased the inequities that we've seen for students. Absenteeism has skyrocketed, and even when our students are with us in person, it is incredibly challenging to navigate the ever-changing systems. and just the opportunity lost from learning last year. I want to be really clear here. It is the circumstances that are challenging, not our students. Our students have always been and continue to be lovely and just a bright spot, not only of my experience working in a challenging environment, but also of our core members. I want to share a short story with you about an 8th grade student on the first day of in-person learning last year. So I think it was like February 22nd. You know, imagine they haven't been in school in a year. Some of them have been able to connect via Zoom. Some of them have not. They've never met their teacher in person. The student went to Will Rogers Middle School, and, you know, the teacher, one of our core members, was starting the lesson, you know, good morning class, I'm glad you're all here. And she looks across the room and there are 32 kids there. Previously in virtual enrollment, she had connected with about 8 in that class. So kids wanted to be there, but just weren't able to really access the virtual format. And, you know, before she started, the student interrupted her and goes, Miss, wait. And he goes, Desk, I love you. I've missed you. Walls, I love you, man. It's so good to see you. And he looked at his colleagues. He was like, friends, aren't we so happy to be here? And this group of 8th graders who can be kind of cynical, right? They erupted in cheering and like laughter and like, you know, kind of like old school whoop, whoop, whoop stuff. And that was how they started their day. And that student kind of was like, you know, a barometer of the feeling of students at that moment, because I heard stories like that, you know, across the city where kids were just joyful to be back in person. And I continue to see that in classrooms today. And they are really hungry. They understand what this last year has meant for them. They know that academically they lost something, and they know that socially they lost something. And they are really eager to close that gap alongside the adults in the building. The kids are amazing. And the adults are also pretty extraordinary. I've spoken a bit about our alumni, and now I want to focus on our 2020 core members who are finishing their 2nd year currently, and our 2021 core members who are first-year teachers right now. I want you to think for a moment. I know you don't want to go back here, but back to spring of 2020. Just really get that feeling in your head. It's spring of 2020, it's March, it's April. Schools have just shut down. NBA games are being canceled, so you know it's big stuff, right? And we don't know what the next couple of months are going to be like. We don't know what the next year is going to be like. Okay, so you've got that feeling in your head, spring of 2020. Now go back to spring of 2021. And I want you to get that feeling in your head. There was lots of hope and promise with the vaccine, yet there was still a lot of uncertainty, right? We started to hear about the Delta variant in the spring of 2021, and it was kind of mixed feelings. Like we felt hopeful, but like still a lot of uncertainty. Okay, imagine at that moment with all the uncertainty in the world, signing up for a new career, signing up to move across the country to Tulsa to teach in a school system where your principal couldn't tell you what the next year was going to look like. They couldn't tell you if we would be virtual or in person. They couldn't tell you if students who entered into your classroom would have had school in the past year. They couldn't tell you what reading grade level to expect kids to be on or what content you would likely need to teach. And that's what our core members said yes to. They signed up courageously. There are 93 of them who said, yes, this is the type of work that we are willing to do because we so deeply believe in the potential of our students. And we intimately know that the system is broken and we want to be a part of that solution. And that's what they're doing. They're working across 25 schools in Tulsa alongside over 300 alumni. So we have a force of over 400 leaders. Like Wendy said, some working in other nonprofits, some working, in other like areas of society to support our work. And they all have just as inspiring stories as Rob's or Elsie's or Carlicia's. So while we know we are working in an inequitable, problem-rich environment, we also know that there is much hope for our community, and there are many people leading in courageous ways. I pulled this quote from our CEO, Elisa Villanueva-Beard, recently, and she said, we can achieve educational equity and excellence in our lifetime. It will require bold leadership, It will require courage and conviction, and it will require all of us together. And when I look across Tulsa, I feel really confident. I mean, even on this call, we have bold and courageous educational leaders here with us today. And Tulsa has a spirit of like rolling up our sleeves and working together. So sometimes visions can seem like, even ours says one day, which is not very, it's not a goal. It's not saying like, when is this going to happen? But the conditions in Tulsa are really set that like, this is going to happen in our lifetime. We are going to rebuild the education system so that all students do have that opportunity to attain an excellent education. I'm going to pause there and go to questions and answers. And Wendy, I know you said you had compiled some.
Yeah, I'd like to start with Karen's question, if you're willing, just to make sure we have time for that, the new announcement that she referenced. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for going back to that. So we received a grant from the State Board of Education, and the focus of that grant is to develop even more of a pipeline for leadership in Oklahoma. So we're trying to develop a teacher leader pipeline and a school leader pipeline. We're still working on all the details of that, but I can tell you about the three main strategies that we're going to be working with to make it come alive. So one, we are going to start a virtual tutoring program, both in Tulsa and Oklahoma City. It's called Ignite. And our hope is to spark college students' interest in working in education. We would love them to become core members through this tutoring experience through Teach for America. And if they decide to, stay on and work at the school and go straight to the role as teacher leader with the school that they're in, that's fine. So we're going to expose even more college students to the need and also the joy of working in education through a tutoring program. And that's set to start this spring. We're also going to do a alumni teacher fellowship where we're going to recruit folks who have done Teach for America across the country back into Oklahoma. So, we have amazing homegrown talent here in Oklahoma. I'm looking across the screen, looking at tons of talented people here. And sometimes those people take advantages of opportunities outside of our state and outside of our city. And so through this fellowship, which is a stipend fellowship, we hope to be able to just entice those people to come home and teach for at least 2 more years in our schools. That will be paired with a stipend and then also some professional development. And we really see that as a pipeline for school leadership as well. And then, go for it, Wendy.
Oh, no, if you're not finished, please continue. I lost track of the bullet points.
Okay, there's one more strategy within that, and it is a school leadership development program. So it will also be stipend and support current folks who are already in the pipeline. Maybe they are an instructional leader on campus. Perhaps they have, a leadership role like an assistant principal leadership. We're going to cohort those people together, provide them development and support so that they are more likely to stay in education and start to lead schools. And certainly we have a lot of successful school leaders here in Tulsa. So that's one of those bright spot strategies that we're trying to take something that's gone well for us and encourage more and more people to take that pathway.
That's terrific. Teresa asked if you do any special outreach to homeless students, and I don't know the answer to that. So it's a good question.
Well, that's a good question. TFA doesn't, but we do support our core members too. So our core members, are the classroom teachers, and they are seeing all of these systemic challenges firsthand. So an individual teacher may see that there's a student who's experiencing homelessness, and then they would want to work to support that student. And so we really connect our core members with the resources in Tulsa. And we're really lucky that there are some really great resources in Tulsa. So we really play the role of connector and thought partner to help each core member kind of solve the most pressing issues that they're seeing in their classroom.
I love that. So Michael knows that I have a real interest in the generations in the workplace and how they show up. And one of the things that I find so inspiring and refreshing about millennials in general, and a lot of people involved in this work, regardless of their generation, is that focus on equity, opportunity, and justice. But I also sometimes hear from another cohort of people who aren't deeply in the work like you are, that, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there. We're never going to create a frictionless or fair environment for everyone. And we really need to be building, ability to compete and resilience. And they're concerned about things like the lack of tracking and that sort of thing. And I wanted to give you a chance to maybe speak to anyone who has those kind of thoughts about how you can build competition, resilience, courage, at the same time you're working for this more fair, just, and equitable world.
That's such a good question, Wendy. And I do love your focus on generations. I just want to shout you out. You've really changed my thought process about that as well. And maybe after this, we can talk more about it, because I actually want to continue to learn more from you. It's such a good question. And I actually, in my own thinking, share some of those value conflicts. I learned a lot of my ideals around leadership from sports. You probably couldn't tell right now, but I used to be a pretty good basketball player. And so competition is kind of embedded in me, and it's really supported me and helped me develop other people. So I definitely think that there is a place in our world for competition. I think a good lens for us all to have is to look at the end of the competition. If the competition is school, if the competition is the ACT, and say, are there people who have benefited? Are there people who started the race halfway at the start line, right? And most of the outcomes we see in education really showcase that. They showcase that our education system is privileging some folks. It's usually high income, it's usually white, and we can see that through the outcomes. And so then we've got to say well, then the competition isn't fair. And it's not just hurting, the children of color or the children from low income communities. It's also hurting, the white folks who ended the race thinking they were on top and that they accomplished something, when that's not really what happened, right? They experience an advantage, kind of like I did in my own educational experience. So I share that as a lens that folks could use of analyze the outcomes and see if the competition was set up in a fair way, and analyze how does that align with your own values? Is that the type of competition that you want to be a part of, basically? And then does competition have a space or a role? And I think it does, as long as we're figuring out ways to make the starting place a more equitable starting place. And that's kind of not specific, but that's how I'm thinking about it.
No, it's very helpful to me, and I will remember that as I talk to others. So another kind of difficult question I have is here, at least in the urban school systems, I really wonder if without these core members, there would have been some system collapse as far as having just sufficient personnel to fill classrooms. Imagine a world without Teach for America and those core members filling those seats. How do you think the school system would have adapted without you? And what has been the impact of having a program? And there's sometimes pushback, they're there 2 years, they take what they learn, they move on. You've talked about your effort to keep people more involved. But how is Teach for America both part of positives in the system and then potential challenges in the system?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm taking a moment just to really consider that.
Yeah, it wasn't an easy question. Sorry.
Fine.
Are we emotional yet? No.
Yeah. No, just kidding. I just want to be honest that I don't think this is that hypothetical of a question. So we continue to see vacancies right now in our schools. We don't have enough subs. So the systems collapse, the word that you use, Wendy, which sounds scary. It is scary. And there's some of that happening right now where, if a teacher needs to be out sick, there aren't subs to cover her classroom or his classroom. And so what's happening in real life in schools right now is those students in that classroom, let's say it's a second grade classroom, they are getting split up. So imagine you show up to school, you're a second grade teacher, your partner teacher is sick, and you get her kids in your classroom now. And so for that day, you have 45 kids in your classroom. And then you hope the next day you either get a sub or the teacher is well enough to come back. And the truth is that that has actually been the case for a really long time. But because of our raised bar for what's acceptable for teachers to come to school with in terms of health, we're seeing it now. So for years, teachers honestly have just come to school when they're not feeling that well because they love their team and they love their kids and they didn't want that impact to happen. It looks like at a secondary level is our teachers aren't really getting much of a plan or a prep time. So if someone's out, you just on your plan time, you go and cover that class. And so that class has, a different teacher each hour. So it's pretty tricky to answer because it doesn't feel hypothetical. I think that's what's happening now. And I do want to just give credit to every single principal, every single, Tulsa Public Schools, Union, Jinx, Broken Arrow. I mean, everyone in the Tulsa area has been hustling and working incredibly hard to recruit more teachers to this area. And I think that we did see a systems change in 2018 when we got, a salary raise, and that actually alleviated some pressure on the challenge that you raised, Wendy, of basically talent pipeline for teachers. That really alleviated some pressure. And unfortunately, I think the pandemic has put that pressure back on. And I think we're going to have to work together to continue to solve that over the next couple of years. And I think Teach for America's presence, bringing in incoming teachers, every year is helping a bit, but we're definitely not alleviating that systems challenge totally.
That is such a wake-up call for those of us who are leaders not in the education system, because it's an essential part of our larger system of the community. So my final question to you is hopefully a little bit easier. I think a fun one. What do your core members think of Tulsa when they come? What do you hear from your core members about Tulsa? What would they like to see in Tulsa that would keep them here and their talent?
Well, first of all, I know there are a lot of community leaders on the call, and my biggest piece of feedback is job well done. Our core members really love Tulsa. Some of them knew that they would love it coming in because of the national presence that we've worked really hard to have about what a great place it is to work, to live and work here. And some folks are surprised whenever they get here about how much they love it. They love, the affordability. They love the food and the restaurants. They love the revitalization of our downtown. They love our parks. I mean, certainly the gathering place. Not all of them have children. Some of them do, but even young adults find themselves wandering around and getting lost and feeling in love with the city when they're walking through the gathering place. So they love all the things that we love about it. Something else that they really love that I know each person on this call has been a part of contributing to the culture is the culture of welcoming outsiders, being excited to have them here, thanking them for their work. I think Teresa at the top of the call was like, I just want to thank core members for the work that they've done, at Hamilton when it was a middle school. All of those micro interactions are incredibly important to a core member. I talked a little bit about how hard it is to move away from your family, perhaps, in the middle of the pandemic, and to work at a place where you may not be getting a plan period, right? So you're going in and you're leading a classroom for 8 hours a day and then needing to plan. And this is a new career, so it's a learning curve for you. So they are tired, they are working really hard, and they are starting to notice and learn about the system's challenges and try to imagine how to solve them all at the same time. And to bump into someone at the grocery store who says, hey, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for what you do, means the world to them. And they come into our sessions, we hold sessions like this in the evenings and on the weekends, and they each have stories of just how welcoming and I don't know, it's like cheerleaders, they feel like the city of Tulsa is cheering them on, and that's been incredibly important for them.
certainly very good to hear. And I know that's something I've learned from Jake and Andrew, who started the Tulsa Changemakers, as well as they felt so welcomed and so supported and appreciated. And they just wanted to make that same feeling available to our homegrown talent, which were the young people that they worked with every day. And they speak to that so well. So Amber, I want to thank you for being here today, taking my kind of tricky questions and just giving us such good insight. And I want to thank everyone who joined on. We'll also be sending out the recording. And if you have, Amber, email that you'd like to put in the chat thread or anything for people, we can do that before I sign off. But thank you all for being here.
Will do. Thank you so much, Wendy. I really appreciate you hosting me.